If there is one state that looks and feels like a different planet, it's Utah. Its wild landscapes and soaring rock formations are simply earth-defying. From a river of red sandstone spires, across icy, jagged pinnacles, to the speedy terrain of the Salt Lake Flats, this rugged western state has always captivated Americans with its strange and alien beauty, and cast a spell over all who've dared to clamber up its peaks. It was in one Utah valley that a visionary exile built a new religion, a city, and a soaring temple. It was high above the Utah desert that World War II pilots trained to deliver a terrifying atomic payload, and where, down below, a famous party of pioneers sank in a desert of salt before meeting their grisly fate. In this state's rugged mountains, a Hollywood heartthrob launched a film festival to rival any in the world. Near where the U.S. government is planning to store trillions of electronic communications sent by Americans and others around the globe. Long before Utah became the 45th American state, people have been coming here to imagine a whole new future. High above this incredible landscape, it's easy to see why, in Utah, it's possible to discover a whole new world. No place better captures Utah's otherworldly character than this, Canyonlands National Park in the state's southeast corner. There's nothing like floating through the jagged shapes of the Needles. Or weaving between a spine of tall, thin towers that are known as the Chocolate Drops. These spectacular natural sculptures were carved and chiseled by wind, rain, and the rushing waters of the Green and Colorado rivers. Soaring over Utah, it's easy to imagine that you've left Earth and stepped onto another planet. And that's just what these three Earthlings are doing. They're simulating what it would be like to live and work on Mars, except that they're right here in Utah. These are students from the Georgia Institute of Technology. Utah's space-like terrain makes it the perfect stand-in for the Red Planet. Today, Commander Christine Redmond and her crew are setting out on a fact-finding mission. They need to make sure that a solar device is still working. Each crew member is wearing an oxygen supply pack, just as they'd have to if they were really trying to survive on Mars. This remote outpost is run by the Mars Society, which believes there's a lot to learn just by simulating a mission to Mars. When the team is done, they head back down to their cylindrical habitat, which they call the HAB. This prototype Mars research station comes complete with landing struts and airlocks. Inside is a research lab on the lower level and sleeping quarters above. Each 4 to 6 member crew comes for 2 weeks at a time and has to survive with restricted amounts of food and water in near isolation. Utah's rugged landscape has long attracted those looking to invent the future, to live in a whole new way. That's exactly what one group of pioneers was hoping for as it made its way along a dusty Utah trail like this one in 1847. They were followers of a new faith, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, more commonly known as Mormons. True believers, they lived according to the dictates of their prophet, Joseph Smith, who claimed to have received divine golden tablets from the angel Moroni. These tablets became the Book of Mormon, the touchstone of the new faith. But the Mormons were persecuted for these beliefs and driven out of New York, Missouri, and finally Illinois, where an angry mob murdered their leader. It was Joseph Smith's successor, Brigham Young, who heard about a green valley by a great lake hidden in some western mountains. In 1846, fearing for their lives, Young and thousands of his Mormon followers set out from Nauvoo, Illinois. They crossed what was then the Iowa Territory and kept moving west. The journey took almost a year and a half and covered 1,300 miles. Their trail ended at the site of what's now Salt Lake City in Utah. Some traveled in covered wagons, but many who followed walked the entire way, dragging handcarts behind them. Later, to protect their members, the Mormons would build forts like this one, Cove Fort, to provide shelter and provisions for their fellow travelers. But on this first journey, they had no protection and faced daily exposure to the elements. Many perished along the harsh route. One of the hardest sections of the journey took them up and over a 7,400-foot high pass through the Wasatch Mountains. The Mormons were forced to hack through thickets with axes and push their wagons and animals over the summit. All this after crossing half a continent. Finally, on July 24, 1847, Brigham Young and the first 150 Mormons made it through the mountains. And for the first time, they set eyes on Utah's Great Salt Lake Valley. After reaching the floor of the canyon, it's said that Brigham Young fell to his knees and declared, "This is the right place. Drive on." The "This is the place" monument honors that moment. Every July 24th, Utah residents gather to celebrate Pioneer Day and the Mormons' arrival in Salt Lake Valley. Looking out over the vast lake, Young was determined to build a great Mormon city beside its waters. Today, Salt Lake City is the capital of Utah and the center of Mormon faith around the world. Nothing symbolizes that more than Temple Square, the city's centerpiece. Started in 1853, just 6 years after the Mormons came to Salt Lake, the Salt Lake Temple would take 40 years to finish. It towers some 210 feet over Salt Lake City and is capped by a sculpture of the angel Moroni, who led prophet Joseph Smith to the Book of Mormon. Below the temple spires, a futuristic-looking dome is home to the celebrated Mormon Tabernacle Choir. 360 strong, they rehearse here in the Salt Lake Tabernacle. The structure's unique roof is supported by a system of wedges and dowels. It's home to one of the largest pipe organs in the world. Visitors are welcome in Temple Square, but only Mormons can enter the temple itself. Less than 20 miles from the square is the lake that gives both the temple and the city its name, Great Salt Lake. Covering 1,700 square miles, it's the largest American lake west of the Mississippi and the biggest saltwater lake in the Western Hemisphere. What makes Great Salt Lake so unique is that its water is up to 5 times saltier than the ocean, too salty to support fish and most other aquatic life. The lake is considered a terminal lake, which means there's no outlet. The small amounts of salt in the rivers and streams that flow into it build up over time. With nowhere for the water in the lake to go, it evaporates in the hot Utah sun, leaving vast deposits of salt behind. But even with all this salt, Wildlife thrives on the lake shores, especially here on Antelope Island. Despite the name, the island is actually a home for bison. Herders brought 12 bison to Antelope Island in 1897. Today, it's home to a 550-strong herd. Parts of the Great Salt Lake may remain wild, but more and more, humans are leaving their mark on this water body. Brine ponds established at the lake's edge capture a host of minerals for industrial use. But environmentalists fear that changes like this are inflicting long-term damage on Great Salt Lake. Efforts to preserve Utah's landscape extend well beyond the lake. It was in Utah's mountains that an environmentalist movie star set out to protect one of the state's most beautiful valleys and created a haven for independent filmmakers in the process. "150 years ago, the valleys around Utah's Mount Timpanogos were home to members of a Native American tribe called the Ute. The Utes favored this land for its abundant hunting and grazing, and nearby Utah Lake, which teemed with fish. They hunted in the shadows of waterfalls like this one, known today as Stewart Falls. Utes lived in extended family groups on this land. Men hunted deer, bison, and antelope with bows and arrows, while women collected berries and roots. For centuries, the Utes thrived here. But all that changed when the Mormons and other settlers arrived in the 1840s. As more and more settlers filled the region, they pursued the same land and water resources as the Native Americans, and skirmishes broke out. By 1865, Mormons and Utes were locked in a conflict known as the Black Hawk War. Some 70 settlers and untold numbers of Indians were killed. But by 1870, the Mormons had the Utes cornered and forced them to give up their land and move on to reservations. But the Utes left their tribal name behind, Utah. Native Americans weren't the last people to appreciate these lush valleys and mountains. In 1969, actor Robert Redford was living near here. After landing a role in the outlaw movie Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, he urged its director, George Roy Hill, to film scenes in Utah. Hill agreed. After the success of the movie, Redford built his home near Mount Timpanogos. He also bought a struggling ski resort named Timp Haven and renamed it Sundance. Instead of filling it with modern development, Redford cultivated a creative and environmentally conscious community. Today, the handsome mountain resort includes a conference center, a rehearsal hall, and an art studio. And the name Sundance has become a bona fide brand. Every January, the Sundance Film Festival gets underway here in nearby Park City. It's now one of the largest independent film festivals in the world. Films that have won Sundance's prized audience award include Sex, Lies, and Videotape and Fruitvale Station. Once a silver mining town with saloons and gambling dens, today's Park City is upmarket. Its theaters freshly painted and upholstered for its annual turn in the spotlight. It's been more than 40 years since Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid graced the silver screen. But the legend lives on. The story behind that legend begins right here, outside the town of Circleville. In these fields, where Robert Leroy Parker, the future Butch Cassidy, was raised. Parker's family home exists much as it did more than a century ago. There's a wooden farmhouse, a stable, and an old wagon. From this simple beginning, Parker would go on to become Butch, the infamous cattle rustler, bank robber, and bandit. Before teaming up with his partner in crime, the Sundance Kid. But Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid is just one of hundreds of movies filmed in Utah. The state has long provided an iconic backdrop for Hollywood. These now dilapidated sets near the town of Kanab were a top shooting destination in the glory days of Westerns. The sets became so popular with producers and directors, they functioned as a permanent stage, with many of Kanab's citizens working as film crew and extras. Up until the 1980s, several popular TV shows were also filmed in Kanab, including The Lone Ranger, Lassie, and the long-running Western series Gunsmoke, in which the set was a stand-in for the town of Dodge City, Kansas. Even after 4 decades, the homes, general store, and saloon are still recognizable. Just 1 hour west of Kanab is another place that looks like a movie set from the air. There are men that resemble cowboys, and young families that seem unchanged from pioneer days. And there are few cars on the streets. But these aren't actors. It's real life in a town that's home to a breakaway sect of Mormons, known as the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Almost 3,000 members of the church live here in Hilldale, on Utah's southern border. Another 5,000 members live in Arizona's Colorado City, just across the state line. They lived quietly below the radar until 2006. That's when sensationalist news stories started spreading about why they had broken from the Mormon Church. Many here were practicing polygamy, the practice of taking multiple wives. This group of houses recently belonged to the leader of the Fundamentalist Church, a man named Warren Jeffs. In 2006, he was placed on the FBI's most wanted list, accused of rape and sexual conduct with a minor. That same year, Jeffs was captured, charged, and later convicted of the sexual assault of children. Records showed that he'd married 80 wives, some of them as young as 14. He also expelled some 60 men from his church, and then decided the fate of their wives and children. Warren Jeffs never got to live in this custom-built house. He's now in prison for his crimes. But some say he still rules over this community from his prison cell. Today, polygamy is officially forbidden by the mainstream Mormon Church and is now illegal in all 50 states. But that wasn't the case when the Mormons first came to Utah. As they built Salt Lake City from the ground up, Mormon leader Brigham Young convinced his followers that polygamy was God's intended lifestyle. That may have played well in Utah, but in Washington and the rest of the country, it was a non-starter. And it fully prevented the territory of Utah from becoming a state. In 1857, President James Buchanan sent federal troops to Salt Lake City to remove Brigham Young as territorial governor. And for 30 years after that, the federal government raided Utah in an effort to stamp out polygamy. Finally, in 1890, a new Mormon leader named Wilford Woodruff forbade the practice. 6 years later, with polygamy outlawed, Utah finally became the 45th state of the Union. Today, most Mormons have moved on and left polygamy behind. The modern faith is not represented by Warren Jeffs or Hilldale, but by the students of Brigham Young University here in Provo, just 1 hour south of Salt Lake City. Begun in 1875, the university is still operated by the Mormon Church. It's the largest church-sponsored college in the U.S. 98% of the 33,000 undergraduate student body is Mormon. BYU students are expected to follow a Latter-day Saints honor code, which requires abstinence from alcohol, caffeine, and drugs, and avoidance of premarital sex. Famous students include presidential candidate Mitt Romney, the inventor of television, Philo Farnsworth, and the author of the Twilight Vampire books, Stephanie Meyer. At the heart of the campus is the Missionary Training Center. It's here where Mormon missionaries, in their iconic white shirt sleeves and dark suits, learn church doctrine and the languages of the places they're going. Then they head overseas on missions that will last 2 years. But the landscapes they leave behind can be as strange and captivating as any on planet Earth. On the far east side of Utah is a feast for the eyes and a miracle of geology. Stretching for miles along the Colorado Plateau is a river of red sandstone rocks. In some places, they look like an army of shark fins. In others, homes for fairy tale giants. And then there are the arches for which the park is named. Miraculous sculptures of soaring stone you might expect in an ancient city, but not in the wild. This is Arches National Park, named for its more than 2,000 sandstone arches scattered around the nearly 120 square mile park. The most famous arch in Utah is this one, Delicate Arch. It's one of the most photographed sites in the state and is so iconic, it was chosen for the Utah license plate. How did arches like this one form? Over millennia, groundwater eroded a vast bed of salt deep underground, causing layers of stone above to collapse. Wind, rain, and erosion did the rest, leaving behind these astonishing shapes. No less astonishing are the bike trails of Moab, just a few miles away. Stretching out from the canyon town is a network of bike routes up and down the mountains, including Slick Rock Trail. Bikers ride a 10-mile loop through a challenging desert rock landscape to reach the top of this cliff and a chance to peer down more than 1,000 feet to the Colorado River below. But 60 years ago, people came to Moab for an entirely different reason. They came for uranium. In the early 1950s, the United States and the Soviet Union were locked in an escalating arms race, the Cold War. The U.S. government was desperate for uranium, the crucial fuel for nuclear weapons, and was willing to pay $10,000 for discoveries of the element. Enter Charles Steen, a 30-year-old petroleum geologist. Wanting to cash in on the government's offer, he started searching the area for evidence of uranium. 2 years later, Steen struck nuclear gold. Steen's mine, which he called Mi Vida, or My Life, would ship $1 million worth of pure uranium ore in its first 6 months. But the long-term consequences of this boom were deadly. Uranium-sickened workers contaminated the nearby Colorado River and scarred the landscape. Now the government is spending $1 billion to clean up a mine that was once worth $100 million. 4 days a week, trucks fill this 36-car train with 5,000 tons of contaminated waste for transport to a fortified disposal site. 6 million tons have already been removed, and train shipments are scheduled to continue through 2025. Despite this environmental setback, the striking beauty of Utah's Colorado Plateau endures. Director Ridley Scott selected the gorge at Utah's Dead Horse Point State Park as the location for the final scene to his famous film, Thelma and Louise. It served as a stand-in for the Grand Canyon. Susan Sarandon and Gina Davis played contemporary outlaws, a latter-day female Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. In the movie's legendary finale, marshals finally close in on Thelma and Louise and chase their blue Thunderbird straight towards a cliff. They drive right over the edge, choosing to die rather than be captured. The shot of their convertible in midair over this stretch of the Colorado River is one of modern cinema's most iconic images. If Thelma and Louise had stuck around, they might have seen another Utah wonder from the top of Dead Horse Point. Only this one is man-made. From above, these extraordinary blue and white shapes look like a giant tattoo of a futuristic bird. In fact, they are part of a potash extraction facility, 20 miles west of Moab. Uranium's days may be done around here, but potassium salts, otherwise known as potash, are big business. Here at the Intrepid mine, there are 400 acres of evaporation ponds. Mined potash and salt water combine to form a brine, which is fed into the ponds. Then the water is injected with a bright blue dye, which helps the brine absorb sunlight, speeding evaporation. The result? Potash and salt crystals, which are used in a variety of agricultural and industrial products like fertilizer. Unlike uranium mining, this process is environmentally friendly. Long before industry made its mark in this area of the Utah landscape, it was home to members of an ancient Native American culture. Some of their dwellings have survived. Dating back to around 1200 AD, the ancient Pueblo people made their homes in these remarkable caves. They carved out different chambers for living and worshiping. But the ancient Pueblo mysteriously vanished in the 1300s. And these caves have been empty ever since. But cave dwelling is actually still alive and well in Utah. Call it the Cave McMansion combo. Suburban homes in the front, caves in the back. In 1972, a maverick teacher named Robert Dean Foster was excommunicated from the Mormon Church after being convicted of practicing polygamy. He went rogue. Foster sought out an isolated place to create his own Noah's Ark. In 1979, he leased this giant rock 30 miles from Moab. He blasted several caves and then covered each one with the facade of a modern suburban house. Foster called the finished neighborhood Rockland Ranch, and then welcomed his wives and others interested in his vision. The Mormon renegade died in 2008 at 83. Today, his cave-dwelling community continues to thrive. There's another hideaway southeast of Salt Lake City, but this one doesn't house humans, and there's no public access. It's a place called the Utah Data Center, which happens to be run by one of the most powerful spy organizations in the world. It lies just 20 miles south of Salt Lake City, at the edge of the small town of Bluffdale, in the shadow of the Wasatch Mountains. Here stands a vast, nondescript complex. It would be easy to think this was just another large American manufacturing company. The U.S. government was hoping to keep what's inside these buildings completely under wraps. But that's proving harder and harder to do because the secret is out. In June 2013, Edward Snowden, a former national security analyst, leaked NSA documents and claimed that the agency tracks almost every phone call and email to or from the U.S. Storing all that data requires a lot of servers, which is why the NSA is building this facility. Inside is 1 million square feet of space to house computers that can process billions of electronic communications. Some fear this project represents a fatal blow to privacy in the 21st century, but others argue it's the price we must pay for increased security in an age of terrorism. But in the 19th century, Utah and America were obsessed by an entirely different technology: railroads. In May 1869, the continent was about to be radically transformed with the linking of the Transcontinental Railroad north of Salt Lake City. Thousands of Irish and Italian immigrants were building a railroad west for Union Pacific. Thousands of Chinese laborers were building another railroad east for Central Pacific. The two private companies might never have allowed their tracks to meet if not for an act of Congress that ordered them to connect. More than 100 years later, the speed demons of the Great Salt Lake Flats are leaving those trains in the dust. Utah is known for its summits, soaring rock formations that tower into the air, and high vistas that look over vast stretches of the state. But one of Utah's most legendary landscapes is the opposite: 45 square miles of completely flat white plains. These are the Bonneville Salt Flats. Water and wind have created this unique topography just 90 miles west of Salt Lake City. Thousands of years ago, these flats lay below a massive lake, but that lake evaporated, leaving a landscape of 90% salt and other minerals. In some places, the salt layer is up to 5 feet thick. Each winter, water still floods the surface of the flats, but all of it evaporates come spring, leaving a fresh layer of salt behind that's perfect for speed. It's August 2013, and hundreds of racing fans are gathering for a Utah obsession: Speed Week. This year, there are 4 separate Speed Week racetracks. Drivers will try to beat their competition and set new world records. Vehicle classes include hot rods, roadsters, belly tankers, lakesters, motorcycles, and streamliners. Some vehicles have such high gear ratios, they need a push truck to get them started. To set a new record on the flats, a driver has to show that he or she can achieve a record speed twice in 2 separate runs. This year, the winner will reach a top speed of almost 452 miles an hour. Streamliners are the fastest. Long, slender bodies and enclosed wheels mean less wind resistance to slow them down. But Speed Week isn't just about speed. It's also about creating fantastic-looking machines that inspire awe as they fly across this futuristic landscape. For decades, these forbidding flats triggered more fear than awe. That's because of the catastrophe that befell a group of pioneers known as the Donner Party in 1846. That year, the same year the Mormons traveled west, another band of immigrants set out for California, looking for their own promised land. But the party, made up of the Donner and Reed families from Illinois, followed bad advice from a businessman named Lanford Hastings. He advised the Donners and Reeds to take a shortcut across the salt flats instead of going around them. That choice proved to be spectacularly wrong. At the time of crossing, the salt was soft instead of hard. The size of the Donner Party, their wagons, horses, and oxen, was too much weight to bear. Wheels sliced through the ground, and they sank in the salt. Facing disaster, the travelers were forced to jettison wagons. Their animals wandered off in a desperate search for water. But the worst was yet to come. The Donner Party fell so far behind schedule that when they reached the Sierra Nevada mountains, they were trapped by winter. In one of the most disturbing episodes in American history, the Donners were forced to resort to cannibalism to survive. Only half of the original party made it to California. For more than a century, animal skeletons and wagon wheels remained here, encased in salt, a tragic memorial to what happened on these flats. In the 1980s, a flood washed them away. Now, for mile after mile, there is nothing but blinding white. Until you arrive here. In the 1940s, the U.S. government acquired this flat, uninhabited terrain near the tiny town of Wendover. The isolated space was the perfect place to train pilots in secret. A huge expanse hidden by mountains. When it was done, the new Wendover airfield covered nearly 2 million acres, making it America's largest military field. 21 bomber groups and 1,000 air crews lived in these barracks and trained in the sky above them for operations around the world, including D-Day. But hardly any of them knew about the most secret operation underway here. Between October 1944 and June 1945, Colonel Paul Tibbets and the 393rd Bomber Squadron trained in B-29 Superfortress bombers above these salt flats. Their mission? To drop an atomic bomb over Japan. The original loading pit used to lift the test bombs up into the B-29s is still here. Once the planes were loaded, they headed out to practice their runs in the skies over Utah. It was this hangar that housed the most famous bomber of them all, the Enola Gay, which was the one used to unleash nuclear hell on the city and people of Hiroshima, Japan, on August 6, 1945, a day that changed the world forever. 3 decades later, the Air Force closed the Wendover base for good. Enola Gay's historic hangar has been rusting away here ever since. The plane itself is in the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum. Enola Gay isn't Utah's only connection to World War II. This marshland near Mount Topaz, south of Great Salt Lake, was the site of one of America's first internment camps. In the midst of the war, the U.S. government decided the West Coast Japanese-American community was a security risk. So they rounded them up and sent them here by train. For the next 3 years, up to 11,000 Japanese Americans would live on this deserted scrubland, even though they were American citizens and legal residents and hadn't committed any crimes. The Topaz camp was so large, it constituted Utah's 5th biggest city. Surrounded by barbed wire, there was no escape until the war was over. Today, the buildings are gone, but their foundations hint at the vast size of a place many have called a concentration camp. Signs are the only reminders of the buildings that used to stand here. Very few of those who came to Topaz saw anything but this dry marshland in western Utah. They never had the freedom to discover the dreamlike landscapes that make Utah a phenomenon among states. This kingdom of cliffs and vistas looks and feels like a landscape from the Lord of the Rings. But it's actually Zion National Park in Utah's southwest corner. and it doesn't lack for stunning highlights. Even their names seem to conjure magic. There's the towering rock face known as the Streaked Wall, with its running colors of crimson and cream. And there's the park's dramatic centerpiece, Angel's Landing, a 5,800-foot challenge for those willing to try to make their way to the top. The 2.4-mile trail features steep switchbacks called Walter's Wiggles. From this point on the trail, a climber could fall 1,500 feet straight down to the valley floor. At least 5 climbers have died on this route over the last few years. But for those who reach the final stretch and manage to pull themselves up using these chains, the summit of Angel's Landing awaits, offering the chance to contemplate the wonder of Zion. In the 1930s, new cars and roads made Utah's parks more accessible than ever. And Utahns have been spoiled for choice ever since. That's because Utah is home to what locals call the Mighty Five, 5 major national parks that lie within a few hours' drive of each other. They include Arches, Canyonlands, Capitol Reef, Zion, and what may be the most colorful of them all, Bryce Canyon. It's hard to find the words to describe the forms that lie across this landscape. Forests of stone, amphitheaters of rock. It's as if drip castles made of sand and water were dolloped here by giant children. But these red and pink spires do have a name. They're called hoodoos, which seems like the perfect word given that they could easily be at home in the movie Return of the Jedi. Years of rain and water lash this landscape of limestone rocks, leaving these otherworldly shapes. Imagine trying to raise animals here. That's what a Mormon pioneer named Ebenezer Bryce did. He was the first to settle in this area in 1875. Bryce tried to rear cattle among the hoodoos and reportedly said that this canyon was one hell of a place to lose a cow. Now, the cattle are gone, and the thrilling canyon bears his name. But despite its dry desert landscapes, Utah is a land of endless surprises. And the Glen Canyon National Recreation Area is one of them. Rivaling Arizona's Grand Canyon for sheer majesty, Utah's Glen Canyon leaves those who see it similarly speechless. Images of this landscape can look like those that rovers might send back to Earth from distant planets. Except here, there's lots of water, including these turquoise ribbons in a place called Moqui Canyon. One of the most beautiful places in the entire state. Not long ago, the only water here was the Colorado River and its tributaries that snake through this part of southern Utah. But all that changed in 1956 when President Eisenhower approved the building of the Glen Canyon Dam just south of the Utah-Arizona border. That action turned a section of the Colorado River into the 4th largest man-made lake in America. Today, Lake Powell is a beloved part of Utah, providing water for irrigating fields and growing populations. From its arches to its canyons, to its miles of salt flats, there really is no place like Utah. one has to admire the vision of those who chose to settle this strange land and make it their own. From Brigham Young to Robert Redford to the Speed Week racers, they've all helped Utah become one of America's most colorful states.